Okay, so if you remember, the Arduino has some different kinds of pins, and the pins that we're going to be working with first are these pins right here, the digital pins. And what it means for something to be digital is it can either be on or off. Okay, and so for Arduino we call it like high or low, and so that's really all it is. Basically, like, it's digital means one or the other. It could be one or the other. Analog, so like if high represents like 1 and low represents 0, it's going to be either 0 or 1. It can't be anything in between. With an analog pin, it can be a whole range of things in between as well. Okay, and so these are going to be really useful for using sensors, but we can accomplish quite a bit also just using these digital pins, ons and offs. Okay, and so far we've learned how to turn them on and off using a function called DigitalRead. So you would take, let's say that you had something connected to pin 12. Okay, you would, if you wanted to use pin 12, you would say set pin mode for pin 12 to be an output. So you'd say pin number, comma, we'll say output. Okay, and then from there you could use the function DigitalRead, and you could take that pin and write it to high to turn it on, or you could write it to low to turn it off. Okay, so assign it as output, and then we can turn on and off. Okay, and so you probably noticed that if you don't assign it as an output but you try to use it as an output, that it doesn't quite function the way it's expected. With LEDs, they'll be really dim, and there's some other issues that can come up. Okay, but so for this video, the next thing we're going to explore is we can also take these pins and turn them into inputs. Okay, and so what that means is, instead of me telling it to write it to high or to low, the Arduino can actually sense whether there's a voltage applied or not, and so if the voltage on that pin is high or low. Okay, and so what we're going to do, like, for that is, instead of using DigitalWrite, we're going to use DigitalRead, and so we're going to tell it to read that particular pin. Okay, and so what this does is checks to see if voltage is high or low at that pin. Okay, and so if it's something is connected and it's turned on, it's going to read high, and if it's low, it's going to read low. And so this is not enough though. Okay, if we want to use this to do anything, we have to store this information somewhere. Okay, so if you remember, like with Python, we could take an input, but we had to store that input somewhere. And so we're going to make a value, we'll say integer, we'll just call it pin read. So whatever the pin reading was, we'll say, and we'll assign it to 0 at first, which would be 0 would correspond with if it was low. Okay, and so we'll say pin reading is equal to digital read of that pin. So what's going to happen here is we're going to go through the loop, we're going to read that pin to see if it's turned on or off, and we're going to assign the value to pin reading. And then the reason this is useful is now we can make decisions. So we can say if the pin reading is the same as 1, which would mean it's turned on, we can do something. Okay, and then we don't do anything otherwise, or we can say, have an else there and say do something else. Okay, and so this allows us to take something, some information from the world, and make a decision based on it. Okay, so this is a really powerful tool, the digital read, and you can see here that will allow us to make a decision, okay, or you allow us to like use it to like trigger something to happen maybe, okay, and we can get really creative with how we use this. Alright, and so one example of when we would use this is if we have a button and then we want, let's say we want to trigger the button to do something, we would connect it to a pin, set that particular pin to an input, and then continue to read that pin over and over and over. Okay, one thing you want to do, especially with your working with a button, is make sure you include some delay time, because if there's not enough delay, then something can happen that's called like a bounce. And so if you can imagine, pushing the pin down is it's a process that takes time, and as you're pushing it down, it can kind of like fluctuate a little bit and stuff like that. And so if you incorporate a delay, it can kind of correct for that time where you're pressing the button essentially, so it doesn't turn on and off a bunch of times or something like that. Okay, and so this is basically, how you might take a digital input and do something with it. Okay, now as far as buttons go, there's other complicating factors, and that's what we're going to look at next.